In the early days of the internet, long before social media became what it is today, strange stories used to travel through forums and personal websites like whispers in the dark. Some of those stories disappeared as quickly as they appeared, buried beneath broken links and forgotten pages. But a few of them survived, passed from one reader to another, growing more unsettling every time someone discovered them again. One of those stories began with a man who simply loved exploring caves. His name was Ted. Ted wasn't a professional explorer. He wasn't a scientist or a researcher. He was just someone who enjoyed adventure and the quiet thrill of discovering places few people had ever seen. On a small personal website, he began documenting his experiences exploring a cave he and a friend had discovered somewhere in the American wilderness. At first, the posts were normal. Ted described the cave entrance, the cold air coming from the darkness, and the excitement of squeezing through narrow passages that led deeper underground. His writing had a calm, almost cheerful tone, as if he were sharing a hobby with strangers online. But there was one section of the cave that caught his attention more than anything else. A passage so tight that it could barely fit a human body. Ted called it the crawl. It was a narrow crack in the rock that seemed to lead somewhere deeper. Every time Ted tried to push through it, the walls pressed so tightly against his shoulders that he had to back out before getting stuck. Most explorers would have stopped there, but Ted became obsessed. He wrote about returning again and again, bringing tools to chip away at the rock. Little by little, he tried to widen the passage so he could squeeze through. Each visit brought him a little further, and each visit seemed to bring something else as well. Strange sounds. At first, Ted thought it was just air moving through the cave system, but the deeper he crawled into the passage, the stranger the sounds became. Sometimes it sounded like distant wind. Other times it sounded like a faint scratching noise somewhere far ahead in the darkness. Ted tried to explain it logically in his journal entries. Maybe animals lived deeper inside the cave. Maybe there were hidden tunnels carrying air through the rock. But something about it bothered him enough that he kept mentioning it in his updates. Weeks passed. Ted continued documenting every attempt to pass through the crawl space. His friend occasionally helped him widen the opening using small tools, carefully removing bits of rock. Eventually, one day, Ted managed to push further into the tunnel than ever before. When he wrote about that moment on his website, the tone of his writing had changed. He described a feeling he couldn't explain, a sense that the deeper part of the cave did not feel empty. He said the darkness in front of him felt different from normal darkness. He also mentioned something else that made readers uneasy. He said he thought he heard movement, not far away, but directly ahead of him. Ted tried to stay calm in his writing, but the tension was obvious. He said he shined his flashlight forward, but the beam of light only revealed more tight stone walls disappearing into darkness. Nothing moved, nothing appeared. And yet he could not shake the feeling that something was there. Still, curiosity kept pulling him back. On the next visit, Ted and his friend returned with better equipment. They brought stronger lights and tools to continue widening the crawl. Ted explained that once the passage opened enough, they might discover an entirely new chamber that had never been explored before. The possibility excited him. But something strange happened during that visit. Ted wrote that while working inside the passage, he suddenly felt a rush of cold air from deeper inside the tunnel. Not a gentle breeze, a sudden burst, strong enough to extinguish the small candle he had placed behind him as a backup light source. The moment the candle went out, Ted said the cave became completely silent. So silent that he could hear his own breathing echoing through the stone. Then he heard the scratching sound again, only this time it sounded closer, much closer. Ted backed out of the passage immediately. When he described the experience online, readers began leaving comments telling him to stop exploring the cave. Some said caves could collapse without warning. Others suggested animals might be living inside the narrow tunnel. Ted tried to reassure everyone that everything was under control, but the next update he posted was far more unsettling. He wrote that since the last visit, he had been experiencing strange dreams. Dreams about being trapped in the narrow crawl space with something moving toward him in the dark. He said the dreams felt incredibly real, so real that he sometimes woke up with the feeling that dirt and stone were pressing against his chest. Despite the fear, Ted decided to return to the cave one more time. He wanted to prove to himself that nothing strange was happening, that everything had a logical explanation. Before we continue deeper into this disturbing story, if you're enjoying this kind of mysterious and chilling tale, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps the channel grow and allows us to keep bringing you more strange stories discovered across the internet. Now, let's return to the cave. Ted's final trip was supposed to be the most successful one yet. He had finally widened the crawl space enough to squeeze through. Slowly, inch by inch, he pushed himself forward into the narrow tunnel, dragging his equipment behind him. The rock scraped against his shoulders. The air felt colder the deeper he went. After several minutes of crawling, the tunnel suddenly opened into a small chamber. Ted described the moment as both exciting and terrifying, because the chamber looked like it had never been touched by human hands. The floor was smooth stone, the walls curved upward into darkness, and the air inside the chamber carried a strange smell he couldn't identify. Ted shined his flashlight across the room. That's when he noticed something carved into the stone wall. Symbols, not natural cracks, not random marks, but shapes that looked deliberately carved. Ted couldn't recognize them, but they seemed old. Very old. As he moved closer to examine the carvings, something happened that he could never fully explain. His flashlight flickered just once, but in that brief moment of darkness, Ted said he heard a sound behind him, a slow movement across the stone floor. He turned the light back toward the entrance of the chamber. The crawl space behind him looked empty, but Ted wrote that the air suddenly felt much colder, as if something had entered the chamber with him. His final message on the website ended with a sentence that has unsettled readers for years. Ted wrote that he planned to return to the cave one last time, but this time he would bring protection, because he was no longer sure that the cave was empty. After that post, the website was never updated again. No new messages, no explanations, just silence. Some people believe Ted simply abandoned the project and moved on with his life. Others think the cave collapsed before he could return, but a few readers who followed his story closely believe something else entirely. They believe Ted discovered something deep in that cave, something hidden in the darkness that had been waiting there for a very long time. And sometimes, when people revisit the old pages of his story on archived websites, they notice something strange. In one of the photographs Ted posted from inside the cave, there appears to be a shape in the darkness behind him, a shape that wasn't mentioned in his writing, a shape that looks almost like a figure standing in the shadows of the chamber, watching, waiting, in the deepest part of a cave where no one was supposed to go.